welcome to a brand new episode of Battle Cry, the only show on Indian television where we get you up close with India's weapons, war fighters, and how this country defends itself. This is a special episode by popular demand on one of India's biggest ever military contests.
Big alarm over India's fighter fleet. Numbers dropping. New jets far away. Is Air Force headed to historic low? What fighters is India looking at? Who's competing for the big prize? Will imports dominate India's airspace? The big fighter alarm is this week's top story on Battle Cry.
It's a week when experts have been sounding the code red alarm on that familiar predicament of the Indian Air Force, its squadron strength. Literally, how many aircraft it has versus how many aircraft it is supposed to have in terms of fighting a war. Well, the picture isn't pretty, and the Indian Air Force Chief himself acknowledged that.
Indian Air Force fighter fleet. Required strength 42 squadrons. Current strength 31 squadrons. Squadron shortfall 11. Fighter shortfall 200. The Indian Air Force, one of the finest air forces in the world, is flying through historic turbulence. A record low in fighter aircraft numbers, coinciding with a time when India needs its maximum military strength. With 4 MiG-21 squadrons very close to retirement and other fighter types in the winter of their operational life, new fighters simply aren't arriving fast enough to stem the declining numbers.
With the given numbers, it may not be impossible to maintain a 24/7 combat air patrol or an air defense watch right across from Sir Creek to Siachen and further to the east. So the numbers definitely are essential. 42 will remain. Like I said, I know that it is a difficult goal to achieve in the next few years or maybe in the next decade or so, but we will review it only based on the situation that arises in our neighborhood. Based on the current situation, based on the mandate given to the Indian Air Force, I think it is essential that we need to build up the numbers.
The Air Force's predicament intensifies with each passing year. The 6 Jaguar squadrons will begin their retirement run starting 2025. By the end of this decade, the Air Force's Mirage 2000 and MiG-29 fighters will also have a finish line in sight. The fighter aircraft that the Air Force operates in maximum numbers, the Su-30 MKI, will be upgraded. But the oldest airframes that were delivered at the turn of the millennium will also begin dropping out of service starting from the next decade. This matrix of retirements means the Air Force has a constant internal war to fight. For starters, plans to order a dozen more Su-30s and 21 more MiG-29s from Russia have been deferred for the moment. On the other hand, the Indian Air Force's order for 83 indigenous light combat aircraft Tejas will hopefully begin deliveries within the next 2 years. But perhaps the most ambitious plan to stop the decline in numbers is a grand international contest. where a number of fighters will compete for a contract for 114 fighters, amounting to about 6 fighter squadrons.
We are also committed to acquiring the LCA Mark IIs and the AMCA in future. The quest for getting a 4.5 or 5th generation MRFA aircraft continues. We have analyzed all the RFI responses. The ASQRs are being finalized. We were seeking more commitments from all the OEMs for ensuring the indigenous content and the Make in India provisions are adhered to by all the OEMs. So that is work in progress. So with all these inductions of probably 6 squadrons of the Mark II, the AMCA and the MRFA, I would still think that we will be at a state of about 35 to 36 squadrons by middle of next decade.
The Indian Air Force's newest fighter jets, 36 French Rafales, have provided a solid boost to an advanced frontline offensive capability, usefully arriving just when the India-China standoff in Ladakh was escalating. But just 36 aircraft, even of such an advanced type, can be no replacement for the sheer numbers required to fight from the air. The Air Force has a plan, but will it move fast enough? Or could the Vayu Sena be on the threshold of a historic low in its fighter strength? Bureau Report, India Today.
But the Indian Air Force does have a plan in place. And part of that plan that the Indian Air Force has in place includes trying to identify and purchase a whopping 114 of a foreign aircraft type. There are 7 aircraft contenders. These are just 4 of them, and it stands to be one of the biggest ever military procurements in history. Take a look at the multi-role fighter aircraft contest that the Indian Air Force is pushing very, very hard for right now.
हमेशा जुल्म का पंजा मरोड़ता हूँ मैं। दावान अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह रब्बिल आलमीन।
रफेल जहां की रहमत करके सच्चे बादशाह वाहिगुरू का खालसा वाहिगुरू की फतेह।
We are very thankful today for this blessed occasion that has granted to us for the induction of these aircrafts to our country.
Images from 3 years ago of India's Defence Minister welcoming India's first Rafale fighters. The Air Force remembers this as a day of great relief and delight. But it also remembers that it has received only 36 fighters, a fraction of the 126 fighters it had originally said it needed. Something is better than nothing. Yes, but what next? What about the remaining 100-odd fighters that the Air Force had planned for? Well, here's what's happening on that front. Program name, multi-role fighter aircraft. Numbers required, 114. Squadrons, 6. Status, ongoing. Officially kicking off in April 2018, as many as 7 foreign fighters are prospective contenders for one of the biggest fighter purchases in the world. One of these fighters from the US, Europe and Russia will win a contract to supply a handful of aircraft from their foreign factory and build the remaining 100-odd jets in India in a joint venture with an Indian strategic production partner. Let's go through the contender lineup, one by one. Contender 1, Rafale from France. Perhaps the most familiar contender is the French Rafale, the fighter that already populates 2 Indian Air Force squadrons. The fighter is hoping that this by itself gives it the biggest possible advantage in the contest, since the Indian Air Force has already invested large sums of money building infrastructure to support the Rafale fleet. Additionally, the Rafale is in contention for an Indian Navy deck-based fighter order. So its French maker Dassault is pushing the Rafale as a low-risk win-win option for the Indian Air Force. Contender 2, F-15 Eagle from USA. A surprise contender that dropped into the race was Boeing's new F-15 Eagle II, the newest and most advanced avatar of the iconic and battle-tested F-15 fighter. Boeing is hoping that the aircraft's new technologies that draw from the very latest in the US Air Force's requirements could make it a formidable contender in the sweepstakes. Other than, of course, the political clout that an American jet brings with it. Contender 3, Gripen from Sweden. Seen as an underdog, the latest version of Sweden's Gripen fighter is also in the contest. Manufacturer Saab believes it has the most cost-effective package on offer to the Indian Air Force. One that will provide India with a robust combat aircraft that does not burn a hole in Vayu Bhavan's pocket. Contender 4, Sukhoi Su-35 from Russia. Another contender that plonked itself in the race was Russia's Sukhoi Su-35, the latest avatar in the family of fighters that spawned the Indian Air Force's existing Su-30 MKI. Russia is pitching the Su-35 as a logical next step purchase for the Indian Air Force, since it already operates so many Sukhoi fighters, and therefore commonality could be a massive benefit. Contender 5, Lockheed Martin F-21 from USA. The Lockheed Martin F-21, the latest and most advanced version of the legacy F-16 fighter, remains in the Indian Air Force contest. After several twists and turns in the earlier tender, America's latest defense firm rebranded the aircraft as F-21 to suggest it was a totally different fighter with none of the vintage associations that clung to the F-16 name. The fact that Pakistan continues to operate and receive support for its own fleet of F-16 jets has been seen as a major roadblock for this fighter in the Indian Air Force contest. But with enormous political backing from the US government, it doggedly believes it has a fighting chance. Contender 6th, Eurofighter Typhoon from EU. The Eurofighter Typhoon, built by a consortium of European companies led by Airbus, was a co-frontrunner for the Indian Air Force's earlier deal. Losing out to the Rafale, the makers believe they were rejected unfairly and have since stayed under the radar, yet remained firm that they are ready to supply the Indian Air Force with their jets. As things stand, the Typhoon is an official contender for the new multi-role fighter aircraft contest. Contender 7, Boeing F-A-18 Super Hornet from USA. The Boeing F-A-18 Super Hornet, most recently in the limelight in the big Top Gun sequel, has been in contention for an Indian Air Force contract for well over 15 years now. Boeing believes that the US Navy's decision to purchase many more Super Hornets even today, coupled with Indian Navy's consideration of this jet for tech-based operations gives Boeing a living, breathing chance in the new contest. Contender 8, MiG-35 from Russia. And finally, a fighter with perhaps the least chance of success in the sweepstakes. Russia's MiG-35, basically a souped-up and technologically advanced avatar of the legendary MiG-29. Russia believes the Indian Air Force's big existing fleet of upgraded MiG-29 fighters makes a logic case for a similar but more advanced version of the same aircraft type, since it would perhaps save costs on infrastructure and training. Once considered a viable option, the Air Force has made it all but clear that its next choice is unlikely to be a MiG type. While the process to identify one of these fighters began in 2018, the Indian Air Force has signaled that it will be putting this program on the fast track. But how fast is that fast track? Remains the multi-billion-dollar question. Bureau Report, India Today.
So India's trying to get some imported fighters. It's going to build some fighters as well. And the reason for that is, even though the Indian Air Force does have a vast fleet of aircraft, it isn't anywhere close to what it's supposed to have. And what is already in service, it won't be long before they start retiring as well. Here's a look at the Indian Air Force's current fleet.
The Indian Air Force is one of the most unique air forces in the world. Its active fleet includes everything from one of the oldest combat jets, the MiG-21, all the way to some of the most modern jets, like the Rafale. In terms of different aircraft types, the Indian Air Force is every aviation aficionado's dream. It is a veritable buffet of aircraft types, drawn across the years from different parts of the world. Let's now walk you through the Indian Air Force's fleet of fighter aircraft. The dominant Indian Air Force jet is the Russian-origin Sukhoi Su-30 MKI, a big, heavy air dominance fighter that populates squadrons across the country, with over 270 aircraft currently in service and at least a dozen more in the pipeline. These big jets are also in line for a major upgrade of electronics and weapons. These jets are built under license by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited in Nashik, Maharashtra. In second place, in terms of numbers, are the Indian Air Force's Anglo-French Jaguar attack aircraft. About 6 squadrons of these jets, or about 130 aircraft, are currently active in Indian service, with some configured for the anti-ship role out at sea. Like the Su-30, Jaguars have been built under license from the British by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. In the third place is the legendary Russian-origin MiG-29 multi-role fighter, 65 of which currently fly in Indian Air Force squadrons. The MiG-29s have been through a major upgrade in their weaponry and sensors, transforming them into much more modern air assets. In fourth place is the Soviet-era MiG-21, an aircraft well past its prime and with a notorious reputation for fatal accidents. But that doesn't mean the jet hasn't been modernized and proven its worth in conflict. Nevertheless, the age of the MiG-21 has long passed, and the last 54 of these vintage jets will be gone from Indian services in the next 2 years. In the fifth place is the French origin Mirage 2000. One of the most beloved and trusted combat aircraft in Indian service. It is these jets that India's air power planners have always turned to for offensive action. From the bombing of Tiger Hill in the Kargil War to the airstrikes on Balakot in 2019. Mirages have proven their reliability and worth over and over again in a long stint with the Indian Air Force. An expensive but robust upgrade program continues to keep them pretty close to the cutting edge. In sixth place is the Indian Air Force's newest jet, the younger cousin of the Mirage, the French Rafale. 36 of these jets currently populate 2 Indian Air Force squadrons in the north and east. Their arrival coincided with the India-China standoff in Ladakh, allowing the Air Force to keep them flying in a live conflict scenario from the get-go. France has hoped for years that India will at least double its order for these formidable jets. But for now, as we showed you earlier, India wants options to pick from. And finally, in 7th place in terms of numbers is India's very own homegrown fighter, the Tejas. Formerly designated the LCA or Light Combat Aircraft, just over 30 of these fighters currently operate from 2 squadrons in Tamil Nadu, with nearly 100 more of improved varieties in the pipeline. The Indian Air Force is contemplating more orders and has put its weight behind a much more capable Mk2 avatar of the Tejas. Very well worth noting is the futuristic program that looms in the distance for Indian Air Force. India's indigenous 5th generation fighter, designated AMCA for Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, should see progress and testing this decade, with induction likely in the next decade if things go smoothly. As the Indian Air Force enters its 91st year of existence, the future of its air power is at a historic crossroad. Bureau Report, India Today.
I very much hope you enjoyed this special episode of Battle Cry. I'll see you at the same time next week. Remember, as we always say here on the show, India's true potential and security will only truly be attained when no human needs to be sent into battle and no weapon fired. Thanks for watching.